And then if we do have, since we have a community feel, if for some reason somebody says something, they don't like it, and we decide not to post it, we're allowed to veto it. So you get 24 hours to decide. So if anything, certainly for the man of the hour, that's totally true. So, and that's just even a general thing. Nobody has objected so far, so we posted them all up on the TOK. I will eventually get an actual YouTube channel instead of linking up. I'm marketing. We all have talents, people. Marketing's never been one of mine. But we're working on it. Zach's coaching me. So, right, Zach? And we got people setting up a YouTube channel as we speak, so, on my behalf. So that's a miracle. So, all right. Well, I'll just go ahead and get rolling then, because I want to make sure we get the full time. So this is a really special opportunity for me, because Peter's a special guy to me. So I'm just going to give you the basic day. What I have today is I'm just going to be most of the focus is I'm going to be asking Peter about his story. I got a lot of questions that I want. So that's going to be the primary format, is us just engage in a dialogue at first. Then I'll back off and see whether people have any questions. And then we'll see to go. Peter's got at least till 6:30. We could possibly go over to the Wonder Space afterwards, but we'll see. I know he's got to get to another Stoa thing, because that's a lot of what his life does, is to run to the Stoa. And Daniel is doing his porch thing later on. So I very much enjoy those. And like I said, one of these days I'm going to Zoom bomb him and pop up in the question space. So, but let me first just say why this is really significant to me, because Peter's life and my life then is intersected fairly significantly. As some of you may know, Peter knew and, in some ways even had a role to play with Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson's life, of course, played a big role in my own experience in transforming some of my own, what I paid attention to, how I thought about politics, how I thought about the academy, not so much from his ideas, but really the reaction of what he represented. And some of you know that in the 2017 into 2019 years, my role in my doctoral program changed. I went from being director, I stepped outside of being director, and there were some significant socio-political clashes that emerged in relation. I would say that I got in a fight with my program, would be a proper way of characterizing it. At the root of that fight, as in many ways, I think was an ideological clash that I would now say very clearly could be defined with my sensibility being a meta-modern sensibility, and a subset of very strong postmodern sensibilities that were really striking. And what happened to me was I saw Jordan Peterson flash out into the world, and I was under the impression that a combined integrated doctoral program in psychology would be able to sit on the sidelines of a Jordan Peterson controversy and have sort of rational capacity to watch the players and offer commentary, okay, in relationship to that. And some people thought, no, anybody that would watch this game is corrupt. And then I was like, no, you can. This is an important game to be able to watch. And that became essentially the challenge, where I was like rejecting the people that were rejecting that Peterson was a legitimate figure, that was called a charlatan, a transphobe. Anybody that would support him was a hater. And I was like, really? And to reject him as a charlatan is reject me, basically, is what I said on a number of occasions. We have essentially the same educational background, I'd say similar standing as scholarship. In fact, Peterson would be higher than me in a number of different indicators, so to call him a charlatan. So anyway, then there's this whole idea about, well, what happened? I'm not alone in this, of course. Peterson leaves a wake, and it's the intellectual dark web. And now the spreading off of that, and this is where Peter Limberg plays such a key role. He created the Intellectual Explorers podcast, which I was tracking some, and he invited me on not too long ago. I tracked Rebel Wisdom, where he plays a role in the Wisdom Gym. there's all these emerging communities, Alexander Bard, who he knows, John Vervaeke, who he knows. And now what has become, the digital campfire site that probably has more traffic, more engagement is the Stoa. And of course, Peter's the steward of the Stoa. And so my life has gone from being inside of the academy and thinking that I'm chipping away at the Blue Church to really basically being like, the Blue Church is corrupt between modernism and postmodernism. I've been banging my head for a long time in relationship to that. I've now been immersed in a cultural zeitgeist that is different and feels so much more like my people. And a person arguably as much at the center of that cultural zeitgeist as anybody is Peter Limberg. So I get to learn more about his story today. So that's the backdrop. And Peter, you want to riff off of any of that as you hear that narrative?
Well, thank you for that, Greg, and for those kind words and for inviting me here. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Yeah, I don't know where to begin because you asked, like, maybe riff on my story a little bit. I would say maybe there's kind of 4 pillars that eventually intersected in my life. That's kind of, you touched on all of them, really. One is Stoicism. So I discovered Stoicism quite early on, and if there's any ism I belong to, it's probably that. Even though I hold on to it lightly. And I ended up creating a Stoic group in Toronto. It ended up being the largest Stoic group in the world. And I don't really like talking about Stoicism. I find it boring, actually. And I like to listen to Epictetus, and he says, don't talk about your philosophy, embody it. So that's what I try to do. And I have Stoic practices like writing journals to myself every day, like Marcus Aurelius does. And so that's kind of one pillar. The other pillar would be my livelihood. At one point, I used to work at the University of Toronto in the education. That's how I met Peterson. Then I worked at Dale Carnegie Training, the famous How to Win Friends and Influence People. I'm a trainer there, so I'm a corporate trainer. And I had massive social anxiety when I was young, and I just threw the kitchen sink at it, took Toastmasters, public speaking, all these sorts of acting stuff. So I cultivated a certain social fluency, I would say, and that's going to be related soon. So that's another kind of, I would say, pillar. And the third pillar would be this intellectual jazziness. I just loved novelty, and I just explored. Hence, I created this podcast I closed down called Intellectual Explorers Club. And I viewed it sort of like a performative agnostic, where you adopt this stance of being agnostic without actually being one. So you can kind of a method actor, dive deep in that reality tunnel, or what I call mimetic tribe. So you not only kind of can talk past the ideological Turing test, if you will, kind of speak to propositions, but also feel what it feels like to be in that kind of reality tunnel, which is where my acting background kind of supported that. And yeah, I just bounced around. I'm a correspondent, Toronto correspondent, Rebel Wisdom. I founded the intellectual Deep Web.
How long, when you started the Intellectual Explorers Club, when did that start, and how long did you do that for?
So I started that Stoicism group I talked about, and I got bored of it, really. I kept it alive. And so I created another group called Intellectual Explorers Club, which allowed me to be like intellectually jazzy. And I did these sort of groups in order to kind of like free myself from the existential anxiety I was experiencing working for a 9-to-5 at that time. So I did that about 3 years ago, and then there's an adjacent podcast associated with it, and that's the one I reached out to you to come on. And John Vervaeke was on that one. So a lot of people on that podcast kind of that was like the entry point to the wider sense-making web. And so Alexander Bard and I created the Intellectual Dark Web Forum. I was working with Rebel Wisdom.
How did you know Bard? I didn't realize how central you were to that. Can you tell me a little bit about the Bard connection and creating that?
Yeah. So that's the fourth pillar. So I'll just all the intellectual, jazziness. I just involved in all these things because I just attracted to it. And then I would say the fourth pillar is the culture war stuff. So I was when I was at the University of Toronto, I had this dark night of the soul, if you will. I refer to it as a demonic attack because it felt like a demonic presence was channeled through me and trying to take over my body, and I was invaded with intrusive thoughts. And that eventually led me to Peterson, Jordan Peterson. This is well before he became famous. And he was sort of like kind of like a indie rock band, like an intellectual equivalent of an indie rock band. Like all the cool intellectual kids knew him in Toronto, but no one outside the wider, GTA area really knew who he was. And I was a philosophy major. He was in psychology. And I was working on campus at the time that I saw a lecture of him because I just went to see lectures after my job. And he said he had a clinical practice. I didn't know that. And he takes clients. I'm like, oh shit. So I kind of reached out to him because we had a really good generous benefit plan. And I just, visited hell, it felt like. So I'm like, hey, it felt like a good, opportunity. And then, yeah, we hit it off. I was his patient for 2 years. And we were both experiencing the same thing from me from administration and him from kind of like, the faculty, about sort of this woke social justice thing that was occurring in the university. And my last session with him was the day after he released that video on the pronoun. And that wasn't why it was my last session. It just kind of weirdly worked out that way. And then he just got launched into the culture war, and me witnessing my former therapist, like, whoa.
It's so weird.
It's wild. And then that sort of just processing 2016, all that headiness. And I was tracking, due to my intellectual jazziness, the third pillar, I was tracking all the tribes, the social justice tribe, the alt-right tribes, the tribes on the chans they didn't even want to go into. And not only just intellectually tracking them, but feeling them too. So just sort of like, an ontological diversity I was cultivating. And that, it did give me sort of almost another psychotic break, but then it afforded me to write this white paper that was quite influential in this meta-modern sense-making game beef space called Mimetic Tribes and Culture War 2.0. And the central argument of that was, instead of viewing the culture war as a bipolar war between left and right, Fox News, CNN type thing, viewed as a multipolar war full of all these mimetic tribes. And then there's a spreadsheet that listed all of them, like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, Manosphere, neo-reactionary. And then they have like sacred values, existential threats, all that type of stuff. And yeah, everyone just started coming on my radar after that. Jordan Hall, the meta-modernists, Alexander Bard, and I befriended them all, and I went on this kind of meta-modern podcast circuit. And then I did the Intellectual Explorers Club at the same time. And then, so that's the 4 pillars of me. Then they all, when COVID came online, they all kind of intersected with the Stoa. And so I can go into that now if you like. But if you have any questions,
absolutely.
And so my dream was to kind of open up a philosophical coffee shop here in Toronto, because I had these 2 big philosophy groups, like the largest Stoa group in the world, and this Intellectual Explorers Club. And it was a pain in the butt trying to find location to have all my kind of philosophy type meetings. So I wanted a coffee shop so it serves as like a, this like cool hipster, third wave coffee shop. And then it moonlights as an event space. And I wanted to call it the Stoa because the Stoa Pokali was where the Stoics originally got their name, which is the painted porch. They just, Zeno just hung on the porch philosophizing. So I'm like, yeah, that's freaking cool. It's called the Stoa. So that was the idea. COVID came online. Good thing I didn't open it up. And then just sort of like a rush of, I got kind of untethered from reality. And every time, so there's 2 things that happened. I got kind of untethered from reality a little bit. And this creative energy, which I like to call the daemon, which anytime I did anything interesting in my life, that sort of quality of intuition, I like to call it, if you want to look at it in a secular lens, is associated with that creative spark. And it just came on in a very strong way, and I just followed it. And then the Stoa emerged. I said, let's open up this digital campfire, and just all the events I want to do in person, I am doing in person, let's just do it online. But this time, let's invite everyone in the world to do it. So the podcast that I had, which is quite popular in this sense-making web, and all my kind of event spaces just merge into one. And then it became this sort of communal podcast, wisdom gym. I don't know what the heck it is, but there's a lot of excitement behind it right now. Yeah. So I'll pause there because that was a lot.
Great. So when you felt that energy, what was it directing you somewhere? Did it feel, I know the Stoa emerged. Did you have an intuition that is calling you to play a role? Did it just feel like you had all this energy, and then the Stoas ended up how you directed it? What was the relationship between the energy and what emerged as the Stoa? Do you have a sense?
Yeah, I don't know how it works. I'm mildly dyslexic, so that could have something to play with it, and just connecting all these different ideas. But it's just sort of like an energy that courses through you, and these just delicious ideas pop in your head that are actionable, and it just says go here without any
Right.
guarantee of what's going to engender if you go there.
Right.
And so just taking a risk and going there, because I had pretty much at that point nothing better to do, for multiple reasons, like practical reasons in my life. I didn't know where I was going to go, because the Dale Carnegie stuff, the training stopped in COVID because they had no online presence. It was just all in person.
Okay.
I got some personal bad news and had this existential like depression really, and then COVID came online, and all that anxiety at that time that people were experiencing, the collective anxiety, and I just got tapped into something, and then boom, Stoa was born.
Yeah, no doubt. So, do you see, when you think about sort of what's emerging in the current evolution or time between worlds, where do you feel like your thread is, and what your place, or how do you think about it in that way at all, or is it more of a feeling? What's your sense?
Yeah. So I guess I can like how I operate, I just follow this energy essentially,
Okay.
right? So I don't kind of like have a goal and then reverse engineer, it from there
Right.
type thing. But if I kind of think of what's happening maybe in a descriptive light, um, there's, you're part of this whole meta system builders and this meta modern scene that are trying to um, make sense of what's happening, and trying to make sense after postmodernism, in the wake of postmodernism, really. Um, and I think Stoicism is serving as sort of like a hub for a lot of these thinkers to do their work, and put it on the radar of a lot of people that would have not discovered them. Um, Along with sort of what John Vervaeke calls like an ecology of practices, because I'm also an adjunct researcher at John's Wisdom and Consciousness Lab, where we
Right.
study all these conversational modalities. And so the idea is to develop a wisdom gym with this ecology of practices that is not only informed by a metasystem theory, but supports a metasystem theory.
Right.
Um, and I view sort of the Stoa as a liminal space, in between postmodernism and maybe a meta-modern world, where we can just stay here a little bit. And my Stoicism helps with this, actually, where you don't collapse into any kind of, in this liminal state, there's a lot of unknowingness, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety that's associated with that. And so the idea is not to collapse and run into a different reality tunnel that gives you a guarantee, that gives you an illusion of safety. Just stay in this liminal state, build a great relationship with unknowingness, and be like Socrates, admit that you don't know nothing. And then sort of like, have that home where these people can come and start thinking and making sense of what's happening.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful space. I'm going to ask questions for a little while longer, and certainly if people have questions, you can throw them in the chat. But like I said, I'm going to be selfish and get this story. So John, talk to me a little bit of your connection. Obviously, John and I now since August have become quite connected, and it's been a pretty fast forming friendship. I mean, I tracked him quite a bit online, stalked him online, and knew that I could line up with him systemically. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with him.
Yeah, first, it's coolest thing, all my friends become friends with each other, just like organically, like you, Jordan Hall, John, you. Um, so yeah, when I was at the University of Toronto, John had a meditation class. I never actually took a class with Jordan or John, Jordan Peterson or John Vervaeke, but I did take John's meditation class during the lunch breaks that he had. So that's how I first met him.
Okay.
And I was aware of his work. I read his work on the meaning crisis, or zombies, I think, which influenced a part of the mimetic tribe paper. And then when I had the podcast, I reached out to him again, and then he came on. He had a blast. We had lunch, and then I told him about all these sort of space intersubjective modalities like circling and all that stuff that I've been exploring. And he just like freaked out, and like, oh, his intuition said there was something there. And I'm like, let's do some research. And then we just started like investigating like insight dialogues, empathy circles. We were in a bi-weekly circling group for a while. Just kind of like throwing ourselves in there, and sort of a cowboy research type of way. And then John's, his profile is just blowing up with his video series and meeting all these people. So yeah, I'm good friends with him, and that's how we kind of met.
Right. And I am curious to peer into that research lab a little bit. What kinds of, can you give me a little bit of, you talk about kind of cowboy, is it basically now just, I mean, is it the embodied sort of qualitative piloting of stuff? Or you actually have sort of
Yeah,
research programs that you're starting to systematically analyze?
the idea is to get to that point, but at the moment is just kind of getting our feet wet and experimenting and seeing what's out there. And it's kind of is put on hold really because we were kind of doing our own things and Stoa has captured me. But that was the idea. And we have a video on Rebel Wisdom. Him and I were talking about it, so you can
Yeah.
listen to more of that there.
Right. Yeah, let's circle back to the Stoa because I'm curious about, I mean, it's like, it's 20, it seems like there's a hell of a lot going on there.
Yeah.
What's how you manage that? And I mean, do you have any other life or what is it? I'm curious as to what's that like for you to actually try to coordinate that chaos.
Yeah. So it's been around, I think, what, 6 months, 7 months now. So it came around since COVID came online. We've probably had well over 500 events at this point, Zoom events. And I guess they fall into two buckets. One is like our wisdom gym. That's what I'm calling it. So we have the reoccurring events that are more experimental. We have like a Wim Hof trainer. We're going to have a bioenergetics person. We have a collective presencing. Rhea Bach comes in, which is one of those intersubjective modalities. So those happen. We had Socratic speed dating, intellectual or existential dance parties. So we have all these jazzy things going on there too. None of those get recorded.
Okay.
But that builds a sense of community, right, or communitas. And then we have these more of the communal podcasts, these one-off sessions. Where someone comes in, like we have Noam Chomsky coming in a couple of weeks, and yeah, and so we have all these kind of like big names coming in as well. And then how that works is me or someone interviews them, or they come in with a presentation like you're doing, and then people and ask them questions, and then so it's like the community asks them questions instead of just one person. And then another thing we have is what you're part of is a Sense Maker in Residence series. So for a month, over 4 sessions, someone who's trying to make sense of the world, make sense with us. They come in, present something, and then we have a dialogue. And your series is happening on Thursdays of this month, which is going quite well. And you have Zach Stein coming and talking to you this Thursday. So I'm quite excited for that. Yeah, so those are the 3 buckets right now, and I don't really know how it's going to emerge because all these like sexy ideas are hitting me all the time with the demonic insights. So we'll see where it's going.
We'll see where the energy takes.
Yeah.
Right. And at the sustainability level of it, I'm curious if you can share a little bit about like, do you get support by Patreon and other kinds of elements, and does that feel is it structural enough for you to live your life and things along these lines?
Yeah, and so when we first started, the work froze, and my wife luckily works a pretty decent job. We have decent enough savings, so I'm like, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. Let's just run with this thing. And then in the summer, I was kind of like, it was based off a gift economy at first. So anyone could just kind of gift what they want. I didn't really kind of frame it that well. In the summer, I was thinking of just kind of closing it up really, because I was going through some not a dark night of the soul, but I was going through some stuff which got processed. But then I got re-inspired and then removed the gift economy framing. And then just sort of like, if you want to kind of like what a real patron is, if you want to support a decentralized patronage on Patreon, there's no tier system. So I'm not treating it as a business. You can just $5 more or less. And then, there's about 200 people supporting right now. We have over $2,000 Canadian a month. And it goes to me as a steward, because there's only this one man administrative operation essentially. And so there's a seed salary there, and I'm optimistic that it could be equivalent to what I was previously getting when I was working at Dale Carnegie in maybe a couple of months. So I'm going to stick with it and see what happens. And then I might pivot to do some courses if it feels alive. But I want to do things that feel right. I don't want to just like, let's have a fucking course and like, I like we'll become wise afterwards. Like, really? I'd rather do testing and research and kind of like feel good about it before I do something like that. And then if when we can go back to quote unquote normal, then I'd like to open up that coffee shop in a year or so.
Right. Me and there was a time in which in May before the COVID thing, right? It was me and Bard and
Oh yeah, yeah,
Vervaeke, and you were
yeah.
it was
Yeah, I was
kind of
gonna
a little
host that.
disrupted, but
Yeah, 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 yeah.
no, that'd be great. Are there any of the wisdom dream practices that um, find to be particularly compelling? I'm sure they're on there for a reason. I'm sure they all are, but any of them that strike you in ways that are really catch your fancy?
Yeah, yeah. So one thing we're doing, we're having, oh yeah, we're another thing we're doing here. We're having all these kind of like r- research projects, I guess you would call it,
Okay.
informal research projects at the Stoa, where we just like have a strange attractor and investigate certain kind of practices or ideas. And we have one called Communitas Club, where we're like consciously exploring all these different conversational or intersubjective modalities. And I'm finding that like they all kind of, it's like a gym really, and they all work on a different intersubjective muscle.
Hmm.
Edwin Rutches, he's coming in every Sunday. He has something called Empathy Circle. And this is basically a gamification of Carl Rogers' active listening technique, where there's four people and they just listen, repeat, and they do it for 2 hours. And after the end of 2 hours, you're like listening. I think our boy Nicholas is not on mute. So yeah.
Let's see if I hold on 1 second.
He's causing trouble all the time, Nicholas. Nicholas is a facilitator at the Stoa.
All right, he's coming. Muted.
So yeah, the empathy circle, it's like really like just it's a workout, your listening muscle, but it's great. So I find it helps there, and it makes me a better listener. And then like Ria Bach's collective presencing, it's a real, I don't know how to articulate it, but it's a really kind of strange practice that you just sort of, something bubbles up within you and then you speak when you feel called to speak amongst a group of people. And it's just, if you just read this transcript, it feels kind of schizophrenic, but like the actual flow and process of it, it really has a unifying effect. So I guess it practices right speech, if you will. And then there's other ones like restorative circles. Dominic Barter did that. We have one coming, reflective structured dialogue, which is a more dialectic of practice. So the idea is just to experiment with all these and then maybe create our own, mix them together, have modality sex, and see what occurs. And all this kind of gestures towards, John's Dialogos project, all kind of reflected on that.
Right. Guy Sensock came and talked about circling. You've done a fair amount of circling.
Yes.
Do you have, I was connecting that actually to certainly my own training in Carl Rogerian therapy and the capacity to both be present and listen with authenticity and reflect on that. Is there, if you then, I was then wondering a little bit about that. So if you've seen the empathy circling method versus Guy's method, I'm sure there's a fair amount of overlap. Is there also difference between those that you notice?
Yeah, I'd say they're quite different.
Okay.
Empathy circles is more cognitive based, and it gives you like and it's more structured, and it just focuses on more your listening, your listening muscle, and circling. There's different, even though Guy was the guy who founded circling, or he stumbled upon it in Burning Man, is that how he likes to put it, I think.
You told that story.
Yeah, there's all these different circling communities all over the world, and they all kind of have their different spin on it. Like there's a Toronto one's a little bit different what Guy does, and the people in Europe do it a little differently. But I view it sort of like being a connoisseur of your felt sense reality, and it really helps kind of, it's hard to describe. It's like they call it intersubjective meditation practice, wherever the heck that means. But what I found it really helpful for is to communicate what is going on emotionally, and then kind of untethering it from my narrative, my story of what's happening. And so when you articulate what's alive for you, you say, so a story that's occurring right now is that you're not happy, versus like when you said that, like a pain in my chest occurred right here. And then so you just kind of get better at that. And they have like little warm-up games called the imagination game, where you basically say right now, like, so Gregg, I imagine that you're focused on what I'm saying, but then the next question is bubbling up in your head at the same time, and you're negotiating between the two. So, and then you confirm if that's true or not. And then you do the, I imagine you're doing this, Peter, and doing that's like your intuition reps in the intersource and the, social domain really increases.
Right. Sweet.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so I find all these different they all touch on different things. And if you can kind of combine them in a certain way, it's like almost interpersonal martial art that could emerge. And I'm kind of
Mixed,
excited.
mixed
Yeah,
intersubjective
yeah,
methodologies.
exactly. Mixed martial arts of social skills. Totally.
Love it. Love it. What's happening to the Stoa community? I mean, I mean, obviously, certainly I'm feeling sort of where I am. I get networked, and obviously I'm in the metasystemic crowd. So those are the people in particular. But it would seem to me, or it feels that there's just all these network connections that seem to be happening. Do you feel like there's a real community there? Or also, I also wonder, is it so diverse? And is that a really good thing, or is it kind of, it's liminal? So
Yeah. I think it's pretty liminal. And I'm reflecting on what does that word even mean, community? Because a lot of people give it lip service, and there's like a sense of community that people have, but like, what does that mean? And I feel like the next step right now is getting better, like kind of slowing down with my activity, because I was just like, I'm just going crazy with doing like just posting events and stuff, and then slowing down a little bit and maybe interfacing. I call myself the steward of this place, like interfacing more with the people who are basically super users, the people who come often, and not just come to like the collective presencing event or the stoic breath event, but they come to like all of them. So there's like a real sense of belonging to the space. Because some people just come to certain type of events. Some people just come to like the Daniel Smachterberger, John Vervaeke events. Some people come to the more heart-based practices, but then some people go to all of them. And so maybe the people who go to all of them, I got to find a way maybe just to interface with them. So like my daemon, or my access to the daemon, speaks to their access to the daemon, if you will.
Yeah, right. Because then getting that vibe down, and I'll use that word intentionally because you were writing a piece recently about a sort of the identity of the Stoa. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's might be a lot to go into, so I don't know if I'm ready to go there. But
Okay.
I journal to myself every day. Maybe I'll say that every day since COVID came along online, really, and it's a stoic practice. But it's interesting because I'm really being open. I talk about that quote unquote demonic attack I experienced that led me to Peterson. I talk about my last session with Peterson, and I'm just putting myself really at the edge of my thinking in this liminal space in my life, and kind of this kind of collective liminal experience that we're having. And a lot of people are resonating with the journal, and then kind of that process of kind of real radical transparency and truthfulness.
I feel like that's sort of, I think you embody that in a particular way. I think somebody like Jordan Hall and Daniel Schmachtenberger, they sort of give their intellectual transparencies in terms of how they think and the importance of sense making. But I get it from you at a personal heart level, and embodying, just the emotional weirdness and the edge of the space, and just the way you occupy that is very moving.
And the one I mentioned, I think I sent it to you with Peterson. It's like I'm just following his advice. Really, be truthful, and I think it's important to know yourself a little bit too. I don't view myself as an epistemic peer as Jordan Hall, John Vervaeke, or yourself. Even though I can grok your systems and kind of like hang out with you for a bit in that realm, it's not my kind of space. I feel my strength is more kind of facilitation, stewarding, and building relationships with all these weird spaces, and just kind of modeling a sense of maybe heart-based truthfulness, if you will.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think I mean, that's the heart and the soul, and then really the threading processes of embodiment ultimately, right? That for the vast majority of people are going to the extent that whatever this is, if we're in some sort of phase shift and transition and cultivating new embodied ways of being and an ecology of practice, you have to sort of live it and network that.
Right. Yeah. Cool.
I mean, it's been a real impact, Peter. I mean, it's been a transformative. There's something happening culturally, and you were definitely on the leading edge of it.
Thanks, man. It does feel like I think we all in this weird space are tapped into something. But at the same time, like just when I said that, I want to like police any potential bias or bullshit or kind of like, like circle jerk that could emerge from like, oh, look, we're at the edge of the bleeding edge of the collective mind. Like, like, yeah, really,
Yeah.
who the heck knows who we are, right? Like,
Yeah, no doubt.
so I want to police that too, even though it does feel like it, to be honest. But yeah, there's that.
Yeah, no, I think I hope that the system maintains a self-reflective capacity of how easy it is to slip into narcissism,
Yeah.
Self-aggrandizement and all that. And, there's going to be elements of that. At least it seems to be holding some degree of, awareness of shadow and self-deception.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm basically, it's past 6. So anyway, time flies when you're having fun. Let's have questions. Rob, you.
Yeah. Hey, Peter, man. Very nice to meet you. Big fan. One of the things I'm really interested in is, especially how you said, I too had a real, beyond phobia of public speaking, we'll say, right? So I was so scared of even doing Dale Carnegie, right? Let alone ending up being like a trainer there, but that was on the table for me at one point as a possibility. I certainly dabbled in Toastmasters and have done all these things. And in lots of ways, I've gotten past that. I don't want to make any assumptions about it, but in the way that you are navigating this kind of connector energy, right? Are there practices that you're doing? Like, what is that path that gets you to a Noam Chomsky along with all these other great minds? Is this, the luck of being near Vervaeke and Peterson and, a handful of people, and then it sort of built from there and you felt established? Or do you have practices around that? Or like, what would you say is the wisdom behind the success or luck or whatever of how that's going well for you?
Yeah. I think I stumbled on a social talent stack that I'm trying to figure out like how to maybe teach it or articulate it. But like I said, I had this period in my life where I had massive social anxiety. I couldn't even go to a Starbucks, order a coffee with my hand shaking. And then there was, I felt deeply unlikable and I felt deeply unlovable. Like at CBT, one of the core beliefs, I just felt unlovable, like no one loves me. And it got in my head somehow, like I gotta get this shit handled. And so I just threw everything at it: acting classes, pickup artistry, Toastmasters, and I did all these like crazy challenges. I did like this one challenge that Peterson talks about in his lectures. Like I approached 100 women in one day and asked for their number, and I got rejected 73 times. So 27 numbers, not so bad. But they all rejected me nicely, and I think Albert Ellis did something like that too, which I think that was an inspiration.
That's legendary.
Yeah, and so that kind of made me immune to rejection.
Yeah,
and it really informed sort of a lot of understanding of what makes women attractive or attracted to men. And so doing all these things, and then improv was amazing. We had Keith Johnstone, the pioneer of improv, on the Stoa recently. He's like 90 years old, and so he's the guy that invented improv. And improv, if you want to understand status, like on a not just on a proposition level, but on a participatory level, take improv, because then you speak the language of status, and then not only you can speak it, you can manipulate your own status, and then you can kind of leverage your status, the very little you have, in order to, and then you can speak other people's status. Because reaching out to a guy like Noam Chomsky, something's going to like pique his status radar more than someone like maybe Gregg will, or someone like ContraPoints who's coming on, or maybe some Buddhist that I invited on, Shinzen Yang is coming on. And so you just have to feel into it and then just speak that language. And there's all these other things going on too. I don't really know how I do it 100%, but I was informed by all this kind of stuff that I put myself into.
That's amazing. So it's just a quick aside. You said pickup. Eben Pagan?
David D'Angelo, yeah.
Of him, yeah. So past client of mine, by the way, which is really
cool.
Yeah.
He was the first guy that I watched his original series, his first kind of like conference that he did when he compiled all the things together.
Yeah, very cool. So as far as that's great stuff, and improv is amazing. I'm curious, are there habits? It sounds like you said you're following energy more than like planning and trying to live into something cognitive, which I think that's a real interesting distinction. Do you have any kind of setup practices as far as just making sure you're reaching out to people or doing anything habitual or anything that way as far as connector level stuff?
Like social practices, you mean?
Yeah, just like, I'm going to make sure I reach out to 3 people every week or try to, or something, like, is there anything like that going on or no?
I used to do stuff like that when I was sort of in training mode, like approach 100 women a day, like,
Right,
that type of thing,
right,
right? Or
sure.
like reach out to people. But Venkatesh Rao has something really cool. He had a cool term called net playing. So instead of networking, focus on net playing. Play in such a way that your network increases organically through play. And so that energy that I was talking about, the intuition, the daemon stuff, I don't invite people on the podcast that I don't want to talk to. I'm not clout chasing, or at least I don't think I'm clout chasing. Or if it feels like, actually, when I was doing the Intellectual Explorers Club podcast, everyone wanted, I'll tell you a story, everyone wanted to get Ezra Klein on, the guy from Vox, or the Vox, right? Yeah. And I got him on because I know he read my white paper because he mentioned it. So I figured out how to get his email, which is another tricky thing I'm pretty good at. And I invited him on and he agreed, surprisingly. And I had a conversation with him and I hated it. And I said, I can't release this. And so I didn't release it. And then I just ended Intellectual Explorers Club. That's when I stopped really kind of being active on that podcast.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I stopped following the daemons, that kind of energy. I stopped net playing because I was part of the sense making mastermind with Rebel Wisdom, Emerge, Future Thinkers, and they all wanted to get him. And I got him, and I got him out of fucking ego, right? I got him first. And I'm like, yeah, shit. Then it just, my relationship with that energy just died, just went away.
Nice.
And so just moments of that in my life, and then the intersubjective practices I was telling you about, like, just help you kind of like build your, like, get an understanding of your own instrument in your relationship to this creative energy. And I'm like, okay, when I do this, when I act out of ego, it goes away. Like when you're afraid, it goes away. So anyways, I guess I'm net playing. That's like, I have a fidelity to net play. And when I kind of stop that, then it goes away. And so when I net play, and it's like, say if I want to talk to someone like Chomsky, then I utilize my kind of understanding of status and just, and interpersonal dynamics in order to make it happen or try to make it happen. But I don't reach out to someone that I don't feel right about.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say, I don't want the Stoa to get too big, because then too much noise, egoic noise comes and people want to hijack the space. Mimetic tribes will try to colonize it, all that shit. And I'm being kind of sensitive about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Well, I would love to know you beyond this, just so you know that. So I'll be trying to find you other places as well. So
beautiful. Yeah. It's good to meet you, Rob. I think we had an email correspondence or two.
We have, we have. Yeah.
Nick has a question.
Nick, okay.
Yeah, hey Peter, big fan. I've watched a couple dozen episodes of the Stoa. Love the name stuck out right from the start. It's so great. Big fan of the Stoicism myself. So I guess my question for you is, because you're like this master facilitator, so to speak. You know how to bring in the seekers, as Gregg calls them. So something that Gregg and I and several others, and really, I mean, I think a lot of us are working on, is how do we, as a means of trying to solve this meaning crisis, how do we, without recruiting people, make the problem more well known? And I'm kind of forming this question as I talk, so bear with me a sec here. Basically, with your expertise in being able to bring these like-minded individuals together, how would you boil down the message in terms of what you think we need to do to get out of this crisis in some state of okayness?
So what, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but this is what came alive when I was listening to you speak. I think the right move is to seduce the mimetic tribes and then sink them into becoming an embodied tribe. So first we got to model and become an embodied tribe ourselves in these ecology of practices, and getting to communitas, which all these kind of we space circling stuff gestures towards. I think that is what's needed, and stop being addicted to memes and ideas and whatnot. and so I guess step one is figuring out how to become an embodied tribe, which we're doing with the Wisdom Gym. Rebel Wisdom is doing it with their Wisdom Gym and their ecology. And then the other step, which can happen at the same time, which is kind of is at the Stoa, is seduce all these mimetic tribes. So we have ContraPoints, we have Noam Chomsky come in, we have Alexander Dugin came in. You know, it's like we have these anarcho-primitivists like John Zerzan, who was a confidant to the Unabomber at one point. So we have all these wild people that would never discuss, have conversation with each other, but they come to the Stoa and consistently they tell me, I had a great time. You know, like they just love the energy, because it's like, there's really, the beacon of the Stoa is attracting really smart people. Like I could not ask the questions that the people who come to the Stoa ask, but they do it lovingly. And they're not afraid to ask tough questions either. So that delicious combination, it's like a lot of these people, they're in these kind of ecologies where, you know, they have sycophants and fanboys and fangirls. It's not really getting like asked interesting or difficult questions. They're just kind of almost being surrounded by yes people. Or they're experiencing just culture war noise and people hating on them. And so when they come to a space where they're like back in first year university again, in a way where like, wow, I remember this, like this kind of delicious aporia, and then I don't know what the heck's going on, but like I'm at the edge of my thinking and people are here with me and it feels really fucking good. So that's kind of the vibe that the Stoa is cultivating, and it's seductive, you know. So get them warm by the digital campfire, right? And then their followers will come like, what the heck is going on there? Well, these people are kind of weird, they're good looking, they're cool, right? Let's go hang out with them. And then they hang out with us and we track some of their followers, and then, you know, so I don't know beyond what's going to happen beyond that, but I think those are the two moves that at least I am doing with this space. And then like a lot of people are discovering Gregg's work. A lot of people are discovering John Vervaeke's work because of that probably would have not discovered it otherwise. So yeah, I think it's doing good in that regard.
Brilliantly said. That really, when you wonder about your own genius there, that captured it, Peter. That was very, the intuition to fill that space and to draw that and to create that seduction. And that is what it feels like. It feels like an old space, you know, like what used to be the place where you'd be, you know, or at least in some ideal way, a place where you could go and engage with safety, but honesty and authenticity, bravery, all the good stuff just embodied for intellectual discourse and relation. So it's great. Waldemar, I think, had a question.
Yeah, Peter, I've enjoyed learning about you, finding out what you do. I'm curious about what's often called the human condition, sort of an all-encompassing term of being human and trying to adapt to the world. I see you as being in a unique position with all of these different people coming together with different thoughts, ideas, different points of view. At this point, do you see where any of these threads are coming together, perhaps where they should come together, or maybe where they shouldn't come together? Or is it too early for that?
And can you, I'm curious what you mean by like threads in this case, like, and what do you mean by coming together?
Well, you've spoken about a lot of different ideas, different points of view, and different approaches. Some of the people you obviously related to well, some of the people you didn't relate to well. With all of these ideas being expounded on the Stoa, is there any sort of a view that's coalescing out of this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about people like you and Gregg are describing very well where we find ourselves and perhaps how we got here.
Right.
I'm curious about where do we think we're going and where is it that we are going?
Mm-hmm. So I'll answer your question like with one sentence, and then I will say what was bubbling up inside, and I'll speak to that. So I don't know, and I think it's above my pay grade to know. I'd rather tap in Gregg or John or Jordan to answer that question. But the thing that was bubbling up is so Jonathan Haidt, he had this really good metaphor called the rider and the elephant to talk about system 1, system 2. So system 1 is like the emotional, all that type of stuff and intuitions, and system 2 is, cognitive propositions, logic. And the rider thinks he's in charge, but then when they have a disagreement, the elephant, he doesn't have a chance. And he actually said Dale Carnegie was the elephant whisperer, right? I'm like, interesting, because that's what Dale Carnegie teaches. He says Dale Carnegie talks to the elephant. He doesn't talk to the rider. He talks to the elephant. And my training in Dale Carnegie, all this pickup artistry stuff, all that type of stuff affords me to talk to people's elephants directly, essentially. And when I look at mimetic tribes, they all have elephants, and they all really have like kind of shadows too. And I was writing this in a journal entry. It's like my working theory is that kind of left tribes have daddy issues and right tribes or right-wing tribes have mommy issues, right? And then there's a certain kind of, you're going to talk to the elephant differently when someone has mommy issues or have daddy issues. And when someone like Jordan Peterson comes along who embodied or was projected on the archetype of the father, he's going to trigger the shit out of people who have mommy issues. They're not even going to listen to his propositions, even if he's right. Because he wasn't saying anything too radical, Jordan Peterson, in comparison to some of the other people out there, but they didn't like his vibe. They didn't like it because he wasn't speaking with them. He was speaking at them. He wasn't speaking to their elephant. And so he had this kind of, in my opinion, even though I love him, he helped me a lot, but there was like a judgy, fatherly tone that didn't really leave any room for redemption. And I think that just triggered the shit out of a lot of people on the left woke tribes. And so I like, my simple thing is that let's get better at talking to people's elephants and then stop talking at them and try to find them where they're at and talk with them. And then once we build that capacity, then we can get into these deep, juicy discussions and we can deal with the meta crisis and all these existential and suffering risks that are threatening us.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. For me, that seems to be one of the places where we are going, learning how to speak to each other's elephants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Zach.
So, like others, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts and really enjoyed them. What I'm interested in knowing is, like you talked about this embodied, being in an embodied space, so like from mimetic tribes to embodied tribes. And what I see in you is like there is this presence in which there's a calmness, like it's a judgment-free zone, talking to you. And I'm just wondering, what embodiment related practices have you practiced the most, like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that have had the most impact on you?
Like I surprisingly do very little spiritual stuff. Like I don't meditate, I don't do any psychedelics, I don't smoke marijuana. I'm kind of straight edge in a lot of ways, but I do the Stoic algorithm pretty like all the time. Everything's an opportunity to practice Stoicism. So something disrupts my serenity, then I use that like what's in my control. I think journaling, I've been journaling, I have well over probably like I was gonna say well over 10,000 hours, probably almost 100,000 hours of private journaling, where I just really go deep and kick my own ass. And then I delete them all afterwards. But it was only recently that I started journaling publicly. And so that really helps me kind of understand the difference, or like I kind of tease out what I'm feeling. I use Carl Jung's active imagination exercise where I pit two self-personalities against each other and let them talk. So I just really explore my psyche in the journal. And then doing these more somatic practices, like circling and all these intersubjective spaces get me a sense of that. And I kind of geek out like Gregg on all these different psychotherapeutic modalities like acceptance commitment therapy, Gestalt, focusing, narrative therapy. I love them all, really. They're all delicious. And it's kind of like, that gym, they all have a little piece, but if you can kind of like combine them together, have a mixed martial psychotherapy, I'd love to do that project with you, Gregg. And we're having a psychotherapy cafe in the Stoa where we're going to invite practitioners of these therapies and we're going to test them out and kind of maybe create our own. So yeah, I guess like journaling, stoicism, all this psychotherapy stuff, and then doing these somatic practices. I don't have a system really, but I think that informed me becoming more embodied and allowing me to hold space for others.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Lee.
Yeah, Peter, thank you for meeting with us and talking to us. I have to admit, I have not done my homework. I have not met the Stoa, but I took a whole bunch of notes and I will follow up on all this. But I'm going to fish a little bit to see if it's possible our paths have crossed. About 12 years ago, I met online a man named Cop McDonald, and he has, turns out we're both retired electrical engineers. And at that time, he was creating a website called wisdompage.com, which was quite popular at the time. And he was a very good mentor to me, and I learned a lot from him. And then about 10 years ago, he died, sad and kind of unexpectedly. So the Wisdom Page went in a different direction for a while. And by chance, I am now the custodian of the Wisdom Page. I'm sorry, it's simply called wisdompage.com. So my question is, have you ever heard of Copthorne McDonald? Have you ever heard of wisdompage.com? Have you ever heard of, for example, Charles Cassidy, who's on our board?
Yeah, none of that's ringing a bell. I might have, like, given my intellectual jazziness, I probably stumbled across it one time, but yeah, it's not salient for me.
Okay.
Peter, one of my questions that I meant to ask when I was getting, there were a couple, but one that came to mind just sort of out of curiosity is, what was your relation and role in Rebel Wisdom? Did you, yeah, I'm just curious as to what you saw there, where you were in that involvement, and
Yep.
where you are now with that system.
Yep. So I'm good friends with Fuller and Ali. When I released that white paper, they interviewed me when I was in London for Rebel Wisdom, and then they did a piece on mimetic tribes. Then they made me the correspondent, their Toronto correspondent, which I didn't do much. Like, I do a few pieces there, but I haven't done much with them, to be honest. Maybe about three pieces since then. And in the new year, I was in February, I was their, in January, actually, I was their community manager for like a month. And I suggested we have a wisdom gym there at Rebel Wisdom. And then COVID came online, then the Daemon told me to pivot to the Stoa. And so I just kind of left their community manager role, and I did the Stoa. But Fuller and I are still good friends. We're thinking of doing a mimetic mediation course together inside the Rebel Wisdom, I should say. And we're trying to find, I think, right relationship with each other's campfires, because I'm doing all this crazy stuff for free. His stuff is behind a paywall. So it's really kind of informing his unique selling proposition, if you will. So I'm sort of like pushing him to think about that. But yeah, so I'm connected with them, good friends, and we're just flowing, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Another association I'll make that I wanted to ask you about, just for some reason, it's been in a number of conversations that I've had lately. And that's the topic of masculinity. So I had a conversation with Cadell last and saw his Stoa presentation. He's on TOK, and he and I are geeking out together because he's, one of things like that, but also is deeply interested in masculinity, as you know. I was just on a podcast, a little podcast on whole dudes, and they were talking about Black masculinity. I was on in another set of conversations that seemed very relevant. So that where it came up. So it's just been on my mind actually for an interesting number of reasons. And I'd like to, so basically my question to you is, I see the mental health and meaning crisis as a holistic thing. For the last 3 weeks, a series of events have happened. It's like, God, the masculinity piece of this. There are a lot of pieces of it, of course, but the masculinity piece of seems really salient. And I caught, that you made some references to that. Can you speak to your thoughts about masculinity and Stoa, the movements? Do you see a crisis of masculinity? Is that on your radar as part of some of what's going on.
Yeah. So I wrote this journal called Desiring to See Blood last week. It's basically the last time I got in a physical confrontation. Long story, someone he punched me in the face, and then I jumped on him, threw him on the floor, and I started choking him. And I just kind of like just got like ape mode, and I was just wanted to see red. That was what the injury was. I just choking, and then the girl's like, get off him. And then I wrote about, like I feel like I'm a high T individual, if you will. I did Peterson administrated the 5-factor test on me, and then I was like a top percentile disagreeableness, even though my Dale Carnegie-ness kind of like I can cover it up. But I do have this like fucker, fight energy about me, and it bubbles up. And if you don't keep that in check, it can be quite dangerous. You don't build a good relationship with it, like be in right relationship with that energy. And there's a lot of men that have that stormy blood. And if you don't if you shame it away, like the woke tribes do, or if you kind of like just let it run loose, like some of the darker tribes, like the incels or whatever, then shit gets really ugly, as Peterson and you and everyone, a lot of other people talked about. So I investigated a lot about masculinity. There's like the different movements that try to channel this energy. There's like the monomythic poetic, I'm butchering that, like the Robert Bly type guys where they go in the woods, beat drums. They're cool, but I don't really vibe with them. There's like the manosphere type community, which like Jack Donovan, Rouge, Artiste, all those guys, which is related to the pickup artist scene, but in a more kind of anti-feminist light. Then there's like the masculinities that you get into kind of the constructivist kind of social justice scene. So none of the real kind of conversations that are happening about masculinity resonate with me. I haven't listened to Cadell's or read much of his work yet, but he sounds like he's going in the right direction, sort of like a meta-modern masculinity, which is something that I'd like the Stoa to be involved in for sure, because I think it's needed. Because there's no real ideology or conversation that's like fully groks what masculinity is and how to get in right relationship with this energy in our time right now, where we have equality and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I've been feeling with Cadell and I had a long conversation. We're just in the context of getting in touch with my masculine and feminine energies. I spoke quite a bit about my feminine therapeutic energy and my masculine scientific energy. And we riffed off of that for quite some time, and that brought liveness in me in a particular kind of way, and ways in which, and that's got me thinking about the proper dialectic of animus anima in a meta-modern world, and the need, a need for healing and clarity and sort of reshaping, but also healthy rebalancing.
Yeah, totally.
So. You mentioned Noam Chomsky. When you look out at the future of the Stoa, I don't know how far, I know you go with the energy and not necessarily the planning, but I'm just curious in terms of, as you glance out at the horizon, is there things that you're seeing, excited about, anxious about, just reflecting on, or is it really just sort of an unfolding for you?
It's pretty much the latter, the unfolding. I am thinking about what I call the hungry ghosts. When something's beautiful, then you get kind of the cluster B types, the sociopaths. They'll start coming in, and then wanting to influence you, the space. And since it's really an open kind of like digital colonnade, like anyone can come in. And I'd say three people that were trouble. 2 that I had to blacklist from the Stoa. One person wasn't really tethered from reality. Someone tried to blackmail me in like the weirdest way. So I imagine there's going to be more of that I have to figure out. And each one of these people that come along, and they're serving as a forcing function to figure out community standards and stuff like that. But the place is very kind of like raw, edgy, cowboyish, like the whole Stoa thing. And I kind of like it that way because it feels alive, and it's allowing this energy to course through me. And so if I get but fear, it's like if the fear comes online, like, oh, it's going to go away, and then I'm going to create all these like structures, and it's just going to kill the spirit. Yeah. So I just want to be nimble, kind of just see what comes at me, and then respond, and kind of let the thing unfold from there.
Right. Is there, I know we're about ready to wrap up. I know you got to go in relation. Thanks so much. Is there any questions that you have or final thoughts or anything TOK world can help you with or anything along those lines that you would want to leave us with or ask about or anything?
Yeah. I'm curious, like, for anyone in this room or you, Greg, because I just felt like I just just accidentally barfed all this stuff at you, because I'm just like, I'm all over the place. But and what I appreciate about you, Greg, is like you got systems. You're organized. You're internally organized. I'm not like that. So anything that I threw out there resonate with your project? Because I know your work, but I don't know to the extent of all the conversations happening here.
Right. I mean, the resonance is, right. I mean, this is what calls me, Peter, is I go up and I'm a systematizer. I'm a coherent systematizer. Okay. So I want to build the right metaphysical blocks to place the empirical world in its right arrangement, get right relation there. Okay. But it's also, as my wife says, you're a knowledge archaeologist. You'll run out there, you'll find this stuff, you'll put it in the little thing, and you'll systematize it. And that's what I've been doing. Okay. And we need some of that because I think I've got a thread. I think, other people have threads, but that's getting the writer some aspect of a map. But we all know it's the fucking elephant, right? That's in charge. And so what resonates with me is you embody the elephant. I mean, you embody the way of being, right?
So yeah, what like that metaphor I used, the Jonathan Haidt one, so you got to speak to people's elephant, but then use another metaphor, the blind man and the elephant. You actually have to become the elephant and allow people not to understand you, and then and feel their kind of like interpretive violence in a way, and then allow yourself to get triggered with it and use it as almost a spiritual opportunity to do the inner work that's required, and then that speak to that blind man touching you in a way, speak to that mimetic tribe in such a way that's seductive, and then invite them in. So yeah, you got to not only speak to the elephants, you got to be the elephant too, and that's basically what I'm doing here as a steward of the Stoa.
Right, and I love it. It resonates with me. I mean, I'm sort of like, all right, can I bring language like, hey, we have mimetic tribes, and then actually what are these things at some particular level? Oh, there's systems of justification. And what are they actually doing? They're pulling particular elephant investment influence patterns in as a system begins to fracture, right? And I know what Rob's doing is sort of fundamental and identity shifting, helping really develop the practices to shift perspective on these belief systems, both our perceptual and our narrative systems. And I see over and over again, what I call metacultural consciousness really is going adjacent on our belief value systems, right? And then figuring out ways to hold them. They're super important, but they ain't reality. And being able to relate them together, and pull them out of ourselves. We get culturated to be like, oh my God, this is what's real. And this is the ontological truth. And now I have to embody that. And if you're against me, fuck you, And it's like, no, dude, take a chill. Ultimately, I think to get into the digital world, that's the cultural awakening that we need to do, is like pull the culture out and be like, yeah, it's important. We need to look at it. And I think you embody that, and you bring a way of living that. That is so crucial.
And like the way I sent you my journal this today that I'm going to post, so you can I can send you the link at the end if you want to read my journals and all the weird stuff I'm up to. But I view it sort of like buying you guys time in a way, like you meta system builders, like you're building this stuff. And I saw what happened to Jordan Peterson, my therapist. Like the culture war destroyed him. He was a cool guy, but he just got he adopted a certain archetype, and then he just became a warrior. He became a culture warrior. And I don't want that to happen to John Vervaeke. I don't want it to happen to Jordan Hall. Alexander Barr is a little bit of a wild man. He goes out there. I can't do anything about him. But like, I want to be able to like shift the frame where we don't see the culture war. We see the culture war as a culture dance, right? So you got to seduce these mimetic tribes in here and get them warm by the digital campfire. And then once they're cool, like, oh, this is a pretty cool place. This feels like back to first year university. Then they see all these meta system builders doing all this crazy stuff, and they're like, wow, let's play with this. Because it's not culture war stuff that you're doing. But if you say the wrong word, if you don't know all the perspectival languages out there, you're gonna get yourself in trouble.
May I comment or ask a question?
Yeah, Joe, absolutely. Hey, Joe.
All right, sorry.
Sorry,
Peter,
I just saw your note there. I was engaged.
No worries. Thanks. I don't want to be a pessimist on this, but I do want to, well, for actually, I want to mention for people, if you haven't seen Peter's paper, it's from September 2018. It's outstanding. The mimetic paper, I don't know what's it called, like the mimetic tribes or something, the culture war. So I highly recommend that. So it's now 2 years later, right? Plus, I thought you nailed so many of the issues, spot on. And so I'm wondering if now kind of what I think what Voldemar was getting at, and I may be wrong, but I'm going to speak for Voldemar on this, was trying to say, hey, look, here you've created the Stoa, you've created space to bring people together, and they can have very different worldviews, etc., and find that warmth by the digital campfire that you mentioned, right? Great stuff. So that's the positive. And if I understand you correctly, and certainly Gregg's work as well, we're trying to create this, this meta-modern pluralistic vision and integrate where you can integrate all these different worldviews, etc. Now, you outlined, and for those who don't know, a number of the different sort of tribes in that paper, okay? And they're vastly different. And I would argue as a sociologist, they're sociologically located in vastly different spaces in the social universe. So I have a question and a comment. One is, the question is, what do you see has changed, or what progress or lack of progress do you think has been made, Peter, in the 2 years since you wrote that, in terms of, creating this common understanding and the ability for tribes to talk to one another and so forth? Or have we actually regressed in the 2 years? Maybe I'll just leave it at that. I'll just ask you the question, or what are your observations in that regard?
Yeah. So localize it to myself first. When I wrote that paper, I was like an observer of stuff. I wasn't really in it. I didn't have skin in the game. I was just like, just kind of like watching it. And then when COVID came online, I just felt sort of activated, and now I'm sort of in it. And so I feel like even just a different phenomenology being here at the Stoa than I was at the Intellectual Explorers Club, being a performative agnostic and, being meta about the culture war. So that's kind of different with me.
Right.
And I would say things have gotten darker, like a lot darker. So we did regress. What's it called? Like the 2016 election, I thought that was bad. But you watch the protests on the streets and stuff, like, well, this is getting intense. But then there was like a humor behind it too, like all these people getting triggered and stuff. But now, like the protests that are happening, like from both sides or all sides, it's like it's pretty dark. And what could happen in the States with you? Like I'm somewhat grateful that I'm in Canada, because it's like just witnessing it from a distance. So I think definitely things have progressed, but at the same time, I'm just filled with existential hope, because there's people like Gregg out there, there's people like John out there, people like Jordan Hall out there, and we're in it, we're deployed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think to me, what's hopeful, really, I guess it's just back at you, is like the Stoa, right? And the edges are regressing, and then the question really is, how far are we going to fall? And pray to God it's a clear-cut election and not an ambiguous one.
And it
is scary down here.
Yeah. And I will say this, like, I'm just having fun. Right, like I'm just following the daemon, and I'm just having a blast, and I'm just a guy with a Zoom account and a website, and I write to myself, and I do events. That's it. And then all these narratives that I was talked about, like these grandiose narratives, like maybe they're true, maybe they're not true. I'm not attached to it. The Stoics have this practice called negative visualization, where they visualize the worst case scenario, and I did that a lot with myself and with the collective, and I came to terms with a lot of it, and so. Yeah, I'm not some, Pollyanna person that thinks that the world's going to be great. It could get darker, it could get worse. Shit could like really go down. But yeah, that's all the more reason to do what we're doing.
All right. Well, I know you got to get going, brother. I appreciate you staying a little longer.
Yeah.
Coming down and sharing some Stoa love here, man.
That was awesome.
I really appreciate it. Yeah.
And I don't like doing podcasts. I didn't want to do this, but then Gregg said, do it. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And then I really enjoyed myself. So thank you for twisting my arm. And then thank you everyone for
Thank you, Peter.
being warm.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very valuable story, friend. You're doing valuable work. And we want you to know we love you out down here.
Beautiful. Love you
All
right
right.
back, guys.
Okay,
Later.
guys. All righty,
care.
folks.
Bye-bye.
See you next week.
Great stuff, Peter. Thanks.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.
Bye.